My journey to Briarwood Meadows began with the typical dream of settling into a quiet, safe suburban enclave. A two-level townhouse with a neat front lawn, neighbors who wave hello, and an HOA that, according to the listing, ensured peace and harmony. I'd lived in crowded city apartments for years, longing for a more spacious home. When I discovered Briarwood Meadows online, it looked idyllic. Winding roads lined with maple trees, a central clubhouse, and a small artificial pond where families fed ducks on weekends. I never expected that behind the leafy charm lay a fiercely regulated community, where the Homeowners Association wielded its rulebook like an iron scepter. Nor did I anticipate meeting the formidable Belinda Arliss, though everyone knew her by her less formal moniker, Karen. She was in her late 40s, with impeccably styled hair that never seemed out of place, and a posture that suggested she was always on duty. If you asked her, she was simply holding everyone to the highest standards. If you asked the neighbors, they'd say she was lording it over the rest of us. At first, she was merely a name I heard in passing. Karen said we can't place garden gnomes without approval. Karen threatened to fine me for leaving my trash bin out past 10 a.m. But soon, I discovered that Karen wasn't just a stickler for detail. She was an overbearing presence who thrived on petty authority and controlling the minutiae of everyone's life in Briarwood Meadows. It all started innocently enough. One balmy afternoon, while I was walking around the neighborhood to get familiar with the paths, I noticed a small, custom-painted golf cart idling in front of a townhouse near the clubhouse. The cart boasted shiny chrome trim and a flamboyant paint job depicting swirling pastel clouds. I couldn't help but stare. It looked like something out of a beach resort. Then, out stepped Karen, a tall, poised woman, wearing a collared shirt with the HOA logo. She caught my eye. "Admiring my cart?" she asked, her tone friendly yet tinged with self-importance. "I use it for official HOA business, and personal errands, too, of course." I introduced myself as a new resident. She gave a thin smile. "I'm Belinda Arliss, though the neighborhood folks here just call me Karen." "That's fine, I suppose. I serve on the HOA board, you see. Let me know if you ever have concerns about compliance or property guidelines." We chatted briefly. She was polite, but she kept glancing at my outfit, my shoes, and even my posture, as if evaluating whether I fit her notion of an ideal neighbor. Feeling uncomfortable, I excused myself. I tried to remain open-minded. Perhaps she was simply proud of her volunteer position and her fancy golf cart. I had no idea that this cart would become a symbol of her ever-growing sense of entitlement. In the weeks that followed, I settled into my new home. I noticed Karen's cart around the neighborhood constantly, parked near the clubhouse, sometimes near random units, always occupying ample space. I heard rumors from neighbors that she had begun insisting on special parking accommodations, claiming her cart was integral to official HOA duties. Some whispered that she never walked anywhere if she could ride the cart. Others quipped she treated the cart as a status symbol more than anything else. Then, an official HOA email arrived in everyone's inbox, referencing vehicle guidelines. Normally, these guidelines only addressed cars, assigned spots, and visitor parking restrictions. But the new message discussed adjunct vehicles, including golf carts or ATVs, and proposed designating a portion of the main lot as extra space for authorized golf carts. The email had a strong whiff of Karen's influence. She was the only person using a golf cart in Briarwood Meadows, after all. At the next monthly HOA meeting, my first, I witnessed her in action. Sitting at the head table, she proposed an expansion of the community parking area, purely for official carts. She elaborated on how her cart benefited the entire neighborhood, since she could zip around quickly to check landscaping, distribute notices, or greet prospective residents. But the underlying reality was that she just wanted a bigger, more convenient space for her personal convenience. Some board members looked puzzled, but Karen had a persuasive knack for twisting the conversation. She painted a picture of streamlined HOA oversight. By the end of the discussion, the board decided to explore the request, effectively ceding partial victory to Karen. A few days later, bright orange traffic cones appeared in a prime spot near the clubhouse, a place usually reserved for visitors or those needing quick access for deliveries. A handmade sign read, "Reserved for HOA cart, do not block." And so, Karen's flashy golf cart now had its own territory, roped off with cones. This got tongues wagging. Many neighbors grumbled that it was unfair to lose a convenient parking spot, while others shrugged, saying it wasn't worth fighting. But Karen wasn't satisfied. She started complaining that the spot was too tight if cars parked on either side. She demanded an entire double-width space, so her cart wouldn't risk accidental scuffs. When a neighbor, Andrew, accidentally parked slightly over the line, Karen left a furious note threatening fines if he encroached on official HOA property again. Andrew was livid, pointing out that the board hadn't formally approved a double-wide space. Yet Karen acted like it was a done deal. By then, I was following the drama closely. I'd been on the receiving end of a mild scolding from Karen myself. She'd insisted my porch plants were too tall. Her overreach and arrogance rankled me. The final straw came when I overheard Karen telling a friend that the mere presence of other vehicles near her cart was unacceptable, and that she was lobbying for an official rule punishing neighbors who parked within 2 feet of it. She called those who disagreed lazy malcontents who refused to respect proper authority. I realized someone needed to stand up to Karen's nonsense. Although the board seemed reluctant to challenge her, maybe an individual homeowner could. But how? One night, I was watching a home renovation show, half listening to the host talk about creative yard decor. My mind wandered, replaying Karen's antics with her golf cart. For some reason, I recalled how a friend once scared off raccoons by placing a realistic coyote statue in her backyard. That memory merged with Karen's situation in my head, creating a mischievous spark. I pictured setting up sculptures near her self-claimed parking area, something innocuous enough to be decorative, yet startling enough to rattle Karen whenever she arrived. It was a childish notion, but the more I thought about it, the more it delighted me. Karen craved a bigger spot for her cart. Fine. I'd position some lifelike predator statues, wolves, maybe, in the grass right next to that spot. Let her shriek or jump if they spooked her. And if she complained, I could claim it was my artistic expression within my rights as a homeowner. After all, the lawn area near that spot was part of a shared green strip that bordered my unit's lot. According to the guidelines, residents could place reasonable decorative items as long as they didn't obstruct footpaths or violate explicit rules. It would be petty, yes, but after enduring her arrogance, I felt a harmless prank might be a way to push back. And if it gave me a small sense of control, so be it. I decided I'd go for realistic predator statues, lifelike enough to cause a double take at twilight. Browsing online, I found a specialty store selling fiberglass sculptures of wolves, bears, even mountain lions. They were pricey, but the detail was astonishing. Some came with glassy eyes, fierce teeth bared, looking ready to pounce. I giggled at the thought of Karen pulling her cart in at dusk, only to see a snarling wolf silhouette in the corner of her vision. Eventually, I settled on 2 pieces, a coyote statue with an open muzzle, and a small black bear figure rearing up on hind legs. The pair cost more than I wanted, but my frustration with Karen fueled my resolve. I told myself it was just a whimsical yard decoration, well within the HOA guidelines that permitted tasteful ornaments. Sure, they might be borderline terrifying, but taste is subjective, right? I arranged for a discreet shipping option. A few neighbors asked about the large boxes arriving, and I joked I was upgrading my garden decor. I didn't mention the real intent. Once they arrived, I was surprised by how tall the bear statue was, nearly chest-high on me. The coyote was slightly smaller but had a menacing stance. Perfect. I waited until a late evening when Karen's cart wasn't in its roped-off spot to place the statues. Under cover of twilight, I positioned the coyote near the curb, angled so it faced the parking spot. The bear went slightly behind it, half hidden by a shrub, as though lurking in wait. I anchored them with stakes to prevent easy removal. They looked eerie. The streetlight gave them a faint gleam, almost a flicker in the glass eyes. The next morning, I woke early to see if Karen had discovered them. Indeed, her cart was parked a few feet away from the coyote. That suggested she pulled in after I'd gone to bed. But I noticed the cart was off-center, almost crooked. Did that mean she jolted upon seeing the statues? The idea gave me a rush of mischievous delight. Later that day, I stepped out to water my plants and overheard a neighbor, Gina, laughing. She said she saw Karen jump out of her cart, looking alarmed, when she noticed the coyote statue. Gina found it hilarious. According to Gina, Karen marched around the sculptures, scowling, possibly considering if she could remove them. But presumably, she realized they were on private property, bordering the public sidewalk, but within my allowable zone. With no immediate rule to cite, Karen had to leave them be, for now. As expected, it didn't take long for Karen to voice her displeasure. The next afternoon, I heard a sharp knock. Opening my door, I found her standing there, arms folded. She glowered, then glanced over at the coyote statue visible from my porch. "I see you've placed some rather unsettling decorations," she began, forcing a brittle smile. I feigned innocence. "You mean my yard art?" "Yes, I found these predator sculptures quite striking. They add character, don't you think?" Her lips thinned. "They're scaring people, not to mention interfering with official HOA parking. A couple of residents have expressed concerns about feeling startled at night." I raised an eyebrow. "Oh, I wasn't aware of that. They're well within my property line, though, and the guidelines do allow ornamental statues, as long as they're not obstructing common walkways." Karen hesitated. She seemed about to claim they did obstruct the walkway, but realized that wasn't true. There was still ample space to pass. She pivoted tactics. "It's questionable taste, you know, and it's causing me, some neighbors, undue stress. Perhaps you could move them?" I shrugged. "I spent quite a bit on them. They're my chosen decorative pieces. I happen to like wildlife themes. I'm sorry if you find them unsettling, but it's my right, yes?" Her cheeks flushed. Without a direct rule to force their removal, she was stuck. She delivered a vague threat about looking into compliance, but left without a resolution. Closing the door, I sighed with a mixture of guilt and vindication. I disliked confrontation, yet I felt a thrill at having a method to push back against Karen's brazen sense of entitlement. Over the next week, I heard multiple accounts of Karen screeching or jumping whenever she encountered the statues at dusk. Sometimes she'd come rolling in on her cart, not noticing them until the coyote's silhouette caught her peripheral vision. She'd let out a small yelp. Other times, neighbors glimpsed her in the morning, approaching the cart with cautious glances. Word spread that she hated them but couldn't forcibly remove them. A comedic highlight occurred one evening when a late-working neighbor, Paolo, witnessed Karen returning from an HOA dinner. She parked, stepped out. Then the corner of her eye must have registered the bear statue's dark outline behind the shrub. Paolo said Karen yelped so loudly it echoed. Then she huffed, "This is ridiculous," and stomped off, leaving the cart's headlights still on for a minute until she regained composure. Some neighbors felt sorry for her. Others found it delightful payback for her officious behavior. I tried to maintain a neutral stance if people asked, claiming I just liked the aesthetic. But inside, I was smugly enjoying the spectacle. Karen had singled out everyone else's perceived infractions for so long. Now she faced a harmless but unnerving piece of yard art that was absolutely allowed by the same rules she wielded against us. Karen wasn't one to give up easily. She started lobbying the board to revise the ornamental guidelines to disallow threatening or disturbing sculptures. At the next HOA meeting, I sat quietly in the audience, anticipating her move. Indeed, she raised a motion that the association should ban predatory animal statues or any fixtures that incite fear. She called them nuisances that degrade the community's welcoming atmosphere. Fortunately, some board members recognized this was a thinly veiled attempt to target my sculptures. Another member, Lucia, said, "We can't just ban a type of art because it spooks someone. Many folks have garden gnomes, mythical creatures, even Halloween decorations. Where would we draw the line?" Another pointed out that any ban would have to be very specific, yet fairness demanded that they allow personal expression unless it caused real hazard or blocked common areas. Karen's motion went nowhere. The board agreed to review the matter, but no immediate rule changes were made. I breathed easier. For the moment, my predatory statues were safe. Still, Karen's frustration was palpable. She glared at me across the room, as if to say, "This isn't over." Soon after, Karen tried a different angle. She claimed that my statues were interfering with official HOA operations, specifically limiting the safe approach to the designated golf cart area. In a letter delivered to my mailbox, she accused me of illegally expanding personal decor onto communal ground, demanded immediate removal, or face daily fines. The letter bore the HOA letterhead, but only her signature, no one else from the board. I suspected it was another self-issued official warning something she'd done in the past. Checking the actual bylaws, I confirmed I was allowed up to 3 lawn ornaments in the borderline area as long as they didn't exceed 3 feet from the boundary and didn't hinder walkway access. My coyote and bear complied, so I wrote back politely, attaching photos and referencing the exact bylaw sections. I CC'd the entire HOA board, too, exposing Karen's attempt to fine me on questionable grounds. Within 2 days, the board's president emailed me, stating the complaint was unsubstantiated and that no official fine was being levied. Karen's letter was essentially invalid. Furious, she cornered me near the clubhouse that evening, saying I was undermining the HOA's authority. I calmly replied that I was simply following the rules she so often invoked. For once, she had no retort. Amid this back and forth, many neighbors started noticing how comedic it was that Karen, who forced everyone else to comply with her demands, was now powerless to remove 2 statues that spooked her. A few even joked about adding their own wildlife ornaments in solidarity. One neighbor, Tasha, placed a fake owl on her porch, not to scare Karen but as a tongue-in-cheek nod to the situation. Another put up a plastic hawk in a tree. The subtle wave of predator decor gave the neighborhood an oddly thematic look. Karen was livid, suspecting it was all a plot against her. She wrote increasingly exasperated emails to the board about proliferation of frightening displays. But since they were within guidelines, the board had no grounds to force removal. Meanwhile, Karen still demanded the double-wide spot for her cart. The board hesitated, partly because each new drama chipped away at her credibility. Whenever Karen arrived on her cart near dusk, she'd swerve widely around the coyote statue or shine her cart's headlights on it, as if to reassure herself it wasn't alive. Some nights, I glimpsed her from my window, giving a wide berth to the black bear figure behind the bush. I'd stifle a laugh. Childish. Sure. Yet satisfying to watch the self-proclaimed enforcer deal with a powerless vexation. One evening, after a late grocery run, I parked my car near the side alley behind my unit. As I lugged bags to my back door, I heard the hum of a small electric motor. Out of the shadows, Karen's golf cart appeared. She must have been checking for violations under cover of darkness. The cart slowed, and she hopped out. She stepped closer, glancing around to ensure no one else was present. "Look," she said, voice low. "This feud is getting out of hand. You've proven your point. Just remove those monstrous statues. I'll forget the fines. We can move forward." I set down my bags. "Karen, I never saw it as a feud. Just me exercising my right to decorate my property as I see fit, the same way you exercise your right to park your golf cart with special privileges." She bristled. "I'm not privileged. My cart serves the entire HOA's interests." "Does it?" I challenged. "Or is it mostly about your convenience, claiming a double-wide spot near the clubhouse for your personal vehicle? You threatened others with fines for encroaching a single inch. Now you want me to remove my lawful decor because it startles you. Isn't that a double standard?" She flushed. "Don't try to turn this around on me. I represent the rules. You're mocking them." I sighed. "Karen, if you want me to move the statues, perhaps consider adjusting your demands for the cart space. Let the board revert to normal parking guidelines for everyone, including your cart. Show some compromise." She looked ready to argue, but a flicker of doubt crossed her face. Without a word, she pivoted back to the cart and drove off, leaving me alone in the alley with my groceries. I wondered if my suggestion had any chance of success, or if we were doomed to remain at odds. A week later, the board sent out a revised notice. They were removing the special cones from Karen's spot, returning it to normal visitor parking. In the note, the board stated that while the HOA golf cart could park in any general spot, it wouldn't be granted an exclusively enlarged space. If Karen wanted extra room, she could consider parking farther from the clubhouse. It was a gentle rebuke, but a rebuke nonetheless. I suspected my suggestion during that alleyway chat had reached the board through some route. Karen fumed, but she complied. The cones disappeared. She started parking her cart slightly farther away, presumably where the line spacing was a bit wider. As a result, her cart no longer faced the direct glare of the coyote statue near the clubhouse. The comedic run-ins decreased. Yet, her demands for me to remove the statues didn't vanish. She still emailed me personally, urging me to respect the community's aesthetic. Each time, I politely cited the guidelines, refusing to budge. I half expected her to escalate further, but for a brief moment, we reached a lull. She had lost the official battle for a bigger cart spot, and the board was clearly tired of her theatrics. Meanwhile, my predator sculptures remained firmly staked, a quiet testament that one resident had outmaneuvered Karen at her own game. As autumn approached, neighbors began decorating for Halloween. Fake cobwebs, pumpkins, skeletons, typical seasonal flair. I decided to lean into the theme with my existing sculptures. I added subtle red LED lights behind the coyote's eyes to give it a menacing glow at night, and I draped a torn net around the bear's torso, like it had escaped captivity. It looked dramatic, but fit the spooky vibe. One chilly evening, Karen returned from what might have been a late dinner. She pulled her cart around the corner, evidently not expecting the coyote's eyes to glow red. Witnesses said she let out a piercing shriek that rivaled any horror movie. She nearly backed her cart into a lamppost. A small crowd outside recognized that trademark shriek. Some folks ran over, concerned someone was hurt. But it was just Karen, flustered, pointing at the glowing coyote with trembling hands. When she realized the neighbors saw her meltdown, she tried to reassert composure. She berated me loudly, claiming I was terrorizing the neighborhood with nightmare decorations. But ironically, it was Halloween season. Everyone had spooky stuff out. People rolled their eyes. One dad joked, "At least it's not a 12-foot skeleton like Home Depot sells." Laughter spread. Karen stormed off in humiliation. The next day, I expected more threats in my mailbox, but nothing came. Perhaps she'd realized no one would side with her on a Halloween decoration spat. After Halloween ended, I toned down the coyote's eye lights, returning it to a basic sculpture. Karen resumed her routine, driving her cart around, quietly bristling whenever she passed my yard. Rumor had it she was planning one last push at the year-end HOA meeting. A formal proposal to ban any intimidating or predatory ornaments. If that passed, she'd force me to remove the coyote and bear, presumably declaring them intimidating. During that meeting, I took a seat in the front row, ready to defend my stance. Karen cleared her throat and introduced the motion with the typical preamble about community well-being and decor that fosters positivity. Then she singled out lifelike sculptures depicting dangerous animals. Her voice trembled slightly, a mix of anger and embarrassment from the months of conflict. I prepared to speak, but before I could stand up, Lucia, one of the more moderate board members, raised a question. How do we define dangerous or intimidating? Would realistic eagle statues count? What if they're used as garden protectors or pest deterrents? Another member pointed out that dogs and mythical creatures were also sometimes represented in yard art. Where to draw the line was murky. The board wasn't eager to create complicated new guidelines over a single dispute. They recognized it might set a precedent that any neighbor who disliked someone else's decorations could push for a ban. Karen tried to argue the sculptures caused public distress, but no one else claimed to be traumatized. Some found them silly, others found them unique, but not truly harmful. Ultimately, the motion failed, 4-1. Karen was left fuming, eyes ablaze with resentment. I offered no gloating, just relief. My sculptures were safe once again. A few days after that unsuccessful motion, Karen did something surprising. She knocked on my door again, but her demeanor was subdued. When I invited her inside, she declined, preferring to stand on the porch, hands clasped. In a measured tone, she said, "I realize we've been at odds. This cart situation, your statues, it spiraled. I only wanted a safe space for my golf cart, to avoid dings or damage. And I loathe being startled. It's embarrassing." I softened. For all her overbearing ways, she was human. I understand you wanted to protect your vehicle, but can you see how claiming extra space at others' expense might have rubbed us wrong? Especially with the threats and fines. She sighed. Yes, maybe I pushed too hard. But you must admit, your predator statues are over the top. Couldn't you just tone them down? Not remove them entirely, but maybe place them so they're not directly in my line of sight. I thought for a moment. I might reposition them slightly, as a gesture of good faith. But I won't remove them or hide them. They're still my yard art. Karen pursed her lips. Fine. If you move them a bit away from the cart zone, I'll drop the matter, no more attempts to ban them. I'll accept a normal spot for my cart. She extended a hand. Deal. Though I was still wary, I saw this as progress. She was swallowing her pride. We shook hands. I agreed to shift the coyote a few feet back, so it wasn't as close to the curb. The bear would remain behind the shrub, but angled less menacingly. It felt like a compromise I could live with. Following our handshake deal, a curious calm settled over Briarwood Meadows. True to her word, Karen no longer roped off or demanded extra space for her cart. She parked in a regular spot near the clubhouse, sometimes a bit further if the lot was full. Meanwhile, I repositioned the coyote statue to the corner of my garden bed, still visible, but not glaring at her cart's flank. The black bear statue remained, but slightly rotated so it wasn't lurking from her vantage point. Neighbors noticed the change. Andrew joked, "No more screams at night. Guess the coyote must be sleeping." People appreciated that Karen wasn't threatening fines as frequently. Some suspected I'd made a private deal with her. Others speculated she'd finally realized she was outnumbered. Regardless, the tension lessened. Karen remained strict about other regulations, like trash bins, but she toned down the hostility. For me, it was a relief not to be locked in a bitter standoff. I still disliked her bossy streak, but at least we'd found a way to coexist. My sculptures stayed up, garnering occasional chuckles or compliments from visitors. I'd say I won, if only because Karen recognized she couldn't forcibly remove them or claim an oversized cart spot forever. One afternoon, I spotted Karen cleaning her golf cart, wiping the fancy paint job. I recalled how she always boasted about its design, seeing it as a symbol of her role. On a whim, I walked over and remarked that it was indeed a nice cart, praising the artistry. She blinked in surprise, perhaps not expecting kindness from me. We had a civil chat about how she enjoyed driving around the neighborhood, feeling proud to serve the HOA. She admitted she might have overestimated her importance, but deep down, she liked the sense of responsibility. "That's understandable," I said softly. "Maybe next time, just ask the board for a standard cart space or talk it out before demanding a huge reserved area. People might be more cooperative if it's done gently." She nodded, glancing at the coyote statue in the distance. "Guess we all can learn from this, huh?" It wasn't an apology, exactly, but it felt close to one. I realized that behind her haughty exterior, Karen might just be a person who needed to feel valued. Perhaps she clung to the cart and her authority as a means of self-worth. I wouldn't excuse her tyranny, but empathy is never wasted. Time passed. The coyote and bear statues remained a fixture in my yard. Over holidays, I'd decorate them whimsically: Santa hats at Christmas, a scarf in winter, a flower garland in spring. Karen no longer flinched every time she saw them, though occasionally she'd quip that the bear still looks too realistic at night. Her golf cart was still around, but she used a normal parking spot like everyone else. The board never revisited the idea of giving her a dedicated, enlarged spot. Sometimes, I glimpsed her cart near the furthest part of the lot if everything else was taken. She never complained publicly. Maybe she recognized that pushing for special treatment was a losing battle. As for the neighbors, they relished the reduced friction. Many credited the predator sculptures for cracking Karen's tough shell of arrogance. Whether that's overstating it or not, I can't say, but it became a local legend. Remember how Karen screamed at those lifelike wolves? They never did get the species right, mixing up the coyote with a wolf, but I let it slide. Even after a year, newcomers to Briarwood Meadows asked about the realistic coyote and bear in my yard. I'd grin and say it was my personal art installation. If pressed, I'd tell the short version. Once upon a time, an HOA bully demanded an oversized parking spot. In response, I set up these sculptures, harmless but haunting. And Karen, left with no recourse, had to accept them. Over time, the tension eased, and we found a way to live together, each conceding a bit of pride. Thus ended the saga of Karen's quest for a bigger golf cart spot, and my terrifying sculptures that made her scream. In a weird way, it taught me that petty battles can sometimes be resolved through humor and cunning. With enough perseverance and a dash of mischief, even the most self-righteous HOA Karen can be coaxed into compromise. And if your yard art occasionally causes a startled shriek, well, that's just the price of neighborhood entertainment.